Moving schools was never a big deal for me. I'd done it plenty of times before, thanks to my dad's job dragging us all over the place. But something about Whitmore felt different, almost immediately. The building itself was old, like a relic from some forgotten time. The walls felt heavy with secrets, like they had absorbed decades of whispers and memories that no one wanted to remember. My first week there? Totally normal. I mean, as normal as it gets when you're the new girl. Classes, teachers, trying to figure out where the bathrooms were without looking like an idiot. I didn't know many people yet, except for Chloe. She had been there her whole life, and for some reason, she decided to take me under her wing. We clicked pretty fast. But then there was that locker. It was locker 312, at the far end of the 300 hall, and no one went near it. The door was rusted shut, the paint peeling off like it had been abandoned for years. It was creepy, sure, but in a school full of weird old stuff, it didn't stand out too much. Or at least, it shouldn't have. But every time I walked past it, I felt something, like it was watching me. One afternoon, I made the mistake of asking Chloe about it. She gave me this look, like I'd just said something really dumb or really dangerous. "No one goes near that locker," she said, her voice low, like even talking about it was risky. I didn't push it, but that night, that's when the whispers started. At first, I thought it was just the wind. We had these old windows in the house that rattled in the breeze, so when I heard a faint voice, I brushed it off. But then, as I was about to fall asleep, I heard it again. "Help me. Open it." I sat straight up, heart pounding. I looked around my room, my mind racing, but I was alone. Nothing but shadows. The next night, it happened again, and the night after that. The whispers were getting louder, more desperate. "Open it! Let me out!" I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it, pleading, begging. I started to dread going to bed. I'd lie there for hours staring at the ceiling, waiting for the voice. It got so bad that I couldn't focus in school. Every time I walked by locker 312, I swore I could hear it humming, like there was something trapped inside, waiting for me. I was on edge, sleep-deprived, and honestly, I was starting to freak out. That's when Ms. Wallace, the janitor, entered the picture. Ms. Wallace was a quiet lady. She'd been at Whitmore forever, or at least that's what everyone said. No one really paid attention to her, but I started noticing her more. She was always near locker 312, wiping the floor, cleaning the walls, like she was guarding it or something. One day, as I walked by, she grabbed my wrist, hard. Her eyes were wild, like she knew what I'd been hearing. "Don't let it out," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You hear me? Don't." And then she just let go and walked away. No explanation, no warning, nothing. That should have been enough for me to leave it alone. But the whispers wouldn't stop. They followed me home, into my dreams, into every waking moment. I asked a few other kids about the locker, but they shut me down, fast. It was like an unspoken rule. Don't talk about it. The more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. Lights would flicker when I passed by, cold drafts hit me out of nowhere, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Chloe started pulling away from me, probably thinking I was losing it. And maybe I was. But I couldn't stop thinking about the locker, about the whispers, about what was inside. One night, I made up my mind. I was going to open it. I had to. I needed to end whatever was happening, and the only way to do that was to see what was inside. Chloe wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I convinced her to come with me. I made it sound like a dare, something we'd laugh about later. But I wasn't laughing. I was desperate. We snuck into the school after dark, slipping through a broken window near the gym. The hallways were eerily quiet, and as we made our way to the 300 hall, the temperature dropped. My breath came out in white puffs, and Chloe grabbed my arm, her voice trembling. "Megan, I don't like this." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too focused on the locker, on the way it seemed to pulse with energy. My hands shook as I reached for the rusted handle. It wouldn't budge at first, but then, as I tugged harder, I felt it. The breath, cold, right on the back of my neck, and the whisper, louder than ever, "Let me out." With one final yank, the locker creaked open. Inside, there was nothing. Just an old, torn school uniform and a crumpled note. My fingers were numb as I unfolded the paper. It read, "He watches, but you can't see him." That's when I felt it. The hand on my shoulder. Cold and solid, like a dead thing clinging to me. I screamed, spinning around. But Chloe was gone. 1 second she was there, and the next, it was like she had vanished into thin air. I didn't stop to think. I ran, full speed, out of the school, through the empty streets, and all the way home. I don't remember how I got there, just the sound of my heartbeat pounding in my ears. But Chloe never came back. She disappeared that night. And the whispers? They didn't stop. They're louder now, mocking me, laughing. I haven't been back to school since. I didn't go back to school after Chloe disappeared. How could I? I couldn't face that place, couldn't stand the weight of what I'd done, what I'd unleashed. The police looked into it, of course. They asked questions, searched the school, and interviewed students and teachers. But in the end, they found nothing. No clues, no signs of Chloe anywhere. It was like she had simply vanished into thin air. I told them about the locker, about the whispers, but every time I mentioned it, I saw the same look, pity, like they thought I'd cracked under the pressure. But I knew what I heard. I knew what I felt. My parents tried to be supportive, but I could tell they were worried about me. They kept saying I was in shock, that maybe I was making up stories to cope with the trauma. I overheard my mom talking to my dad one night, saying something about survivor's guilt. But I wasn't guilty about anything, at least not in the way they thought. I hadn't imagined what happened. The locker was real, the whispers were real, and I knew deep down that Chloe's disappearance was connected to it. A week after Chloe vanished, Ms. Wallace disappeared too. One day, she was just gone. I wasn't surprised. I couldn't stop thinking about what she had said to me, that desperate warning, "Don't let it out." I had let it out, and now the consequences were unraveling in front of me. And it was far from over. The whispers changed after that. They weren't asking for help anymore. They weren't pleading. No, now they were different, taunting, laughing, like they were enjoying my fear. Every night I would wake up drenched in sweat, certain that something was watching me from the shadows. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the whispers never let me forget what I had done. It wasn't just at night. Everywhere I went, I felt like I wasn't alone. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows darting just out of view. The air would turn cold for no reason, making my skin prickle. And then there was the hand, the cold, familiar pressure on my shoulder, like a ghost reminding me it was still there, still waiting. One night, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door creaking open. My heart raced, but my body felt paralyzed, like something was pressing down on me, keeping me pinned to the bed. The whispers filled the room, louder than they'd ever been before. It was like they were surrounding me, suffocating me. I forced myself to move, to sit up and grab my phone. I tried to call someone, anyone, but the screen stayed dark. My phone was dead, even though it had been fully charged. It was like the world had frozen in that moment, trapping me in my own fear. And then, the door to my room slammed shut with a deafening bang. That's when I saw it. Just for a split second, but I saw it. Something standing at the foot of my bed. A figure, tall and shadowy, its eyes glowing in the darkness. They burned into mine, piercing, terrifying. And then it was gone. Just like that, the figure disappeared as if it had never been there at all. But I knew what I saw. I barely slept that night, too afraid to close my eyes again. I spent the next morning in a haze, trying to convince myself it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew what I had to do. I had to go back to that locker. The school was empty when I sneaked in later that night. The hallways were silent, but I could feel the tension in the air, thick and oppressive. My heart pounded as I made my way down the familiar corridor, each step echoing off the cold walls. Locker 312 stood at the end, waiting for me like it had been expecting my return. I didn't hesitate this time. I yanked the door open, my breath shallow and quick. Inside, it looked the same, except for one thing. A small, cracked hand mirror sat on the floor, its edges jagged and worn. I picked it up, and that's when I heard it again. "He watches." The voice was clear, right next to me, as if someone was standing over my shoulder. I whipped around, but there was nothing there. The mirror felt wrong in my hands, heavy, almost like it was pulling me toward it. I glanced into the cracked glass, and that's when I saw him. His reflection, standing right behind me. His glowing eyes bore into mine through the mirror, full of malevolent intent. I screamed and threw the mirror back into the locker, slamming the door shut as hard as I could. But it was too late. I knew it. I could still feel his presence. He was everywhere now, always watching. I ran home, barely able to breathe, and locked myself in my room, but the whispers followed me. They've never stopped. Every night I hear them. The laughter, the mocking voices, like they're feeding off my fear. And I know he's still watching, waiting for something, waiting for me. I don't know how much longer I can take it. I've spent countless hours trying to understand what's happening to me. Researching, digging through old stories, old records. From what I've found, Locker 312 wasn't just a locker. It was part of some kind of ritual, maybe even a trap. Decades ago, a student went missing, just like Chloe. Rumor has it they were performing some kind of occult practice, and something went wrong. The locker became a prison for whatever spirit or entity they summoned. Ms. Wallace must have known. She was trying to keep it contained, to protect us. But I opened it. And now, I don't think there's any way to undo what I've done. The scariest part? The whispers aren't just in my head anymore. Sometimes I catch glimpses of him in reflections, standing right behind me. I can feel his eyes on me, even when I'm alone. And I don't know how to stop it. Maybe I never will. All I know is whatever I let out, it's not going back in. I'm Ethan, and I was a security guard at Ridgeview Middle School for about 6 months before everything went to hell. It was an easy job. Sit around, check the cameras, walk the halls a few times. Nothing ever happened, until one night, when the bell rang. It was 11:45 p.m., long after everyone had left. I was making my rounds when the bell went off. It wasn't supposed to. The bell system was automated, and no one was there to set it off. I checked my watch. Midnight. The sound echoed through the empty hallways, giving me chills. I walked down to the front office, but everything looked normal. Lights off, doors locked. Then it rang again. It wasn't just any bell. It was the final bell, the one that signaled the end of the day. But why now? I checked the cameras. Nothing. Just the empty hallways and classrooms. I figured it was a glitch in the system, but as I passed the gym, I noticed something. There was someone standing in the corner. A girl, her back turned to me. I called out, but she didn't move. When I walked closer, the bell rang again, louder this time. I blinked, and the girl was gone. The next morning, I mentioned it to the principal, Mr. Holman, who laughed it off. "Must be the ghost of Jessica Miller," he joked. "She died here years ago, you know." I had heard the rumors. Jessica, a student who had disappeared back in 1989, was last seen after school one day, but no one ever found her. Kids always said the school was haunted by her spirit, but I wasn't the superstitious type. That night, the bell rang again. Same time, same eerie sound. And the girl? She was back, always in the corner of the gym, her back to me. I tried to get closer, but the second I did, the final bell would ring, and she would vanish. It kept happening, every night. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus. I became obsessed with finding out who, or what, she was. Then one night I heard the bell again, but this time it didn't stop. It just kept ringing and ringing, louder and louder, until it felt like my head was going to split open. And then silence. When I turned around, there she was, right in front of me, staring with hollow eyes. I quit the next day, but the bell? The bell still rings, and I still hear her voice every time it does. It's not over. When I found the old photograph, I thought it was just an artifact of the past, something long forgotten. But the thing about the past is, it never stays buried. It all started with the photograph. I had been working late, alone, like always, sorting through decades of Northwood High's history for the 50th anniversary yearbook. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, just a boring night of archiving old photographs. But then, there she was. That photograph of the girl sitting alone in the darkroom. Her face was grainy, almost indistinct. but there was something about the way she stared right into the lens, right into me. It wasn't a normal picture. There was a wrongness to it, a kind of awareness that made the hair on the back of my neck rise. Her name? Ellen Price. I had no idea who she was at first, just that the photograph sent a chill through me. My gut told me to show it to Ms. Hartman, our photography teacher, thinking she'd clear it up. Maybe it was some weird old photo effect or something. But when she saw the picture, her face went pale. Not the kind of pale when someone's caught off guard. The kind of pale when someone's remembering something they'd spent years trying to forget. She didn't even give me time to explain. Snatched the photo out of my hands and asked me, almost breathless, "Where did you get this?" "The archives," I stammered. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I could feel her fear crawling up my spine. She didn't say another word, just stuffed the picture into her desk drawer like it was radioactive and told me to forget about it. But I couldn't. How could I? That girl's eyes kept haunting me, that twisted scream frozen on her face. I left her office, unsettled. Ms. Hartman had always been calm, collected. She'd been teaching at Northwood for years. If anyone would know something about the school's history, it was her. The way she reacted. There was more to that photograph, more to Ellen than she wanted me to know. The next night, I was stuck working late again. I should have gone home, but I had deadlines to meet. Alone in the dark room, everything felt normal at first. The soft hum of the equipment, the dim red light, the smell of chemicals, it was all routine. But as the hours dragged on, the air started to feel heavy, almost like something was pressing down on me. I shook it off as exhaustion. I turned off the light, ready to leave, but then I saw her. Standing right there in the doorway, her hollow eyes fixed on me. Ellen. Her mouth twisted in a silent scream, the same expression as in the photograph, except this time, she wasn't frozen. She was real, and she was staring at me. I couldn't move. My body locked up. My fingers fumbled for the light switch, slipping over the plastic. When I finally flicked it back on, she was gone. Just gone. Like she'd never been there. My heart was pounding in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. But I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? A ghost? In the dark room? I didn't even believe it myself. Not yet. But it didn't stop. Every time I stepped into that dark room after that night, I could feel her watching me. At first, it was just a sense, a creeping unease. Then, the photos started. Pictures of her, always with her face obscured by shadows, started showing up in my stacks of film. Photos I hadn't taken. At least, I didn't remember taking them. Then one day, I found a photograph that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just Ellen in the picture anymore. It was me, standing right next to her. Except I hadn't been there. I know I hadn't. I developed that film alone. But there I was, staring back at myself from the photo, my face blank, almost as if I was just as hollow as Ellen. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. I confronted Ms. Hartman. I needed answers. She didn't speak for a long time, just sat there, eyes down, fidgeting with her pen. Then finally she told me what I had feared all along. Ellen Price. She was a student here, 20 years ago. She died in the dark room, under what Ms. Hartman called mysterious circumstances. No one knew exactly how or why, but ever since her death, strange things had been happening in that room. Photos appearing that no one took, equipment malfunctioning, students claiming they saw someone who wasn't there. Ms. Hartman warned me to stay away from the dark room. The room's been off ever since, she said. But by then, it was too late for me. I was already in too deep. The more I tried to forget, the more obsessed I became. I started having dreams. Ellen standing at the foot of my bed, watching me with those hollow eyes. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, but the dreams kept coming night after night until they stopped. And then the nightmares became real. I was alone in the dark room, trying to finish up some work, when I heard it. A faint whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent a shiver down my spine. I turned around, and there she was, her face inches from mine. Her breath was cold, and her eyes, they weren't hollow anymore. They were angry. I could feel her fury in the air, thick and oppressive. I bolted, ran out of the room, didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath. But even then, I could feel her. She was following me, her presence lingering, like a shadow I couldn't shake. I tried to leave Northwood, to get away from it all, but no matter where I went, Ellen was always there. In every reflection, in every dark corner, she was waiting for me. I couldn't escape her. The weight of her death, the mystery of her final moments, followed me everywhere. Looking back now, I don't know if Ellen was haunting me because she wanted to hurt me, or because she wanted me to understand what had happened to her. Maybe she was trying to warn me. But whatever she was trying to say, I couldn't hear it. All I know is that the dark room wasn't haunted by just a ghost. It was haunted by the memory of a girl whose death was still unresolved. Maybe Ellen wasn't the one tormenting me after all. Maybe it was my own fear, my own obsession that had trapped me in her world. But I can't shake the feeling that something is still waiting in the shadows. Whatever haunted Ellen Price, whatever was lurking in the darkroom, had its claws in me now. I couldn't shake it. The whispers, the flickering lights, the sensation of being watched. There was no escape. I needed answers, no matter how deep I had to dig. And so, I began my search, piecing together a story that the school had buried for decades. What I uncovered would change everything. It started with the rumors. After that night, after seeing her, after feeling that cold presence brushing past me, I couldn't just leave it alone. I needed to understand what had happened to Ellen. I dove into the school archives, pulling out yearbooks, old newspaper clippings, anything that mentioned her. The records were vague, almost intentionally so. They described her death as an accident, but there was nothing substantial. It was like she had been erased, hidden behind layers of whispers and forgotten pages. But there were rumors. Students who had been at Northwood around the time of Ellen's death whispered that she hadn't been right for a long time. They said she spent hours alone in the darkroom, obsessed with her photography, even long after the school was empty. Some claimed that Ellen had seen something in the dark, something that no one else could see. I needed more than rumors, I needed facts. That's when I found the article. It was buried deep in the archives, barely legible on yellowed newsprint. The headline read, "Student found dead in darkroom, tragic accident or something more." The details were thin. Ellen's death was ruled an accident, but the reporter hinted at something strange. There were no details about how she died, just that her body was found early the next morning, her face frozen in terror. Why was there so little information? Why was her death brushed under the rug so quickly? I needed answers. The only person who might know what really happened was Lisa Carter, Ellen's best friend back then. Tracking her down was easy. Convincing her to talk, not so much. She lived in the same small, run-down house on the edge of town. When I knocked on her door, she barely cracked it open, her eyes shadowed with years of isolation. I told her I was looking into Ellen's death, but at first, she just shook her head and started to close the door. I didn't let her. "Please," I said, "I need to know." Something in my voice must have broken through her defenses. She hesitated, then opened the door just wide enough for me to slip inside. Lisa wasn't what I expected. She wasn't broken or fragile, more like someone who had locked away their pain so deep it had hardened her. We sat in her dimly lit living room, the silence thick between us. Eventually, she started talking. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, as if the words themselves could bring back what had been lurking in Ellen's life. "Ellen wasn't just another student," Lisa said, her eyes distant. "She was obsessed with something." She paused, glancing towards the shadows in the corners of the room. She'd spend hours in that dark room, waiting. Waiting for what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Lisa's voice dropped even lower. For it. She said she could feel something watching her, something that spoke to her, showed her things she shouldn't have seen. My stomach tightened. The way she spoke, it was like I could feel whatever Ellen had felt, something lurking just beyond sight, waiting in the dark. "The night she died," Lisa continued, "she didn't come home. They found her in the morning, her face frozen in terror. No one knew what happened. The school covered it up, but I know Ellen found something in that dark room, and whatever it was, it killed her." I left Lisa's house with more questions than answers. What had Ellen seen? And why was it coming after me now? It wasn't just her ghost. It was something else, something bigger, darker. Whatever she had been trying to capture in her photos, it had attached itself to me. I tried to avoid the dark room, but it didn't help. The strange occurrences followed me everywhere. The lights flickered in my room at night, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move on their own. Whispers drifted through the hallways, barely audible, like the echo of a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Even in my own home, I felt Ellen, or whatever was left of her, watching me. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to face it. I went back to the dark room one last time. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped. My breath hung in the air and the red light flickered out. I should have run, but I couldn't. I needed to know what Ellen had seen. I pulled out my phone, the faint light barely cutting through the darkness. The room was silent, but there was a sound, a faint, uneven breathing. It wasn't mine. And then I saw her. Ellen, sitting on the stool in the corner, staring at the wall. But something was different. She wasn't the hollow-eyed figure I had seen before. Her body was slumped, lifeless. This wasn't the ghost that had been haunting me. I took a step closer, and suddenly the door slammed shut behind me. My phone flickered and died, plunging me into complete darkness. I felt it then, something cold, something that wasn't Ellen, brushing past me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then, the voice came, faint but unmistakable. She shouldn't have seen it. Now you'll see it too. I screamed, fumbling for the door, but it wouldn't open. The temperature dropped even further, and I felt ice creeping into my lungs. Whatever Ellen had tried to capture, it was here with me now. Not her, but it. Finally, the door flew open, and I stumbled out into the hallway, gasping for air. The lights flickered back on, and the dark room looked normal. But I knew nothing was normal anymore. Something had changed. Ellen wasn't just haunting me. She had been trying to warn me, trying to show me what had really been happening in that room. There was something in there, something that lived in the shadows, waiting for someone to see it. Ellen had seen it, and now I had too. I haven't gone back to the dark room since that night, but I can still feel it. The whispers, the shadows, they follow me everywhere. Whatever Ellen found, whatever killed her, it's not gone. Maybe Ellen wasn't crazy after all. Maybe there really is something in that dark room, something that lives just beyond the light, waiting to be seen. And now it's found me,